Have you ever felt like you had everything you were supposed to want: a good job, a steady paycheck, the respect of your peers? But deep down, there was just an invisible void that used to be my life. Every day was the same familiar grind, working 12-hour days, chasing the goals that society defined as success. I used to think that if I just pushed a little harder, made a little more money, that void would finally disappear. And then I realized I was wrong. I had a house, but I didn't feel at home. I was surrounded by people, but I felt completely alone. The same big question echoed in my mind every single night. Is there another way to live? A way where peace isn't something you chase, but something you feel from within. Then, one day, on a trip I took with no real destination, I stumbled upon 3 ancient teachings that completely changed my life. These weren't abstract theories or strict rules. They were 3 profound inner practices, a roadmap that guided me back to myself. In this video, I'm not just going to tell you my story. I'm going to share that exact roadmap with you, a step-by-step journey that took me from burnout to peace. Coming up, we will explore together. First, the art of seeing the beauty in the smallest things through radical appreciation. Second, how to wisely accept life's storms instead of fighting them in exhaustion. And finally, the secret to the genuine joy that comes from selfless giving. These are the lessons I learned, and I believe they can ignite the light within you too. So let's start this journey together. That feeling of emptiness I told you about, that sense that no matter what you achieve, it's never quite enough. Well, it turns out psychologists have a name for it. They call it the Hedonic treadmill. Imagine you're on a treadmill at the gym. You keep running forward, you're sweating, you're putting in all the effort. But ultimately, you're staying in the exact same spot. That's precisely what happens to our happiness when we attach it to external goals. I remember the feeling when I got my first big promotion. I was ecstatic proud, and I thought, this is it. Everything will be different now. And it was different. For about a month. Slowly, the new salary became my new normal. New pressures replaced the old joy, and I found myself looking towards the next rung on the ladder. The new car, the new phone, the fancy vacation. They all operate the same way. They provide a temporary spike of happiness, and then quickly return us to our baseline, leaving us with an even greater hunger for more. And here's the crucial lesson that Treadmill taught me. The problem isn't the goals themselves. Having dreams and working hard is wonderful. The problem is that we've been misplacing our happiness in those destinations. We believe joy is waiting at the end of the road, when in reality, it's available right here in the journey itself. When I realized I couldn't find peace in the world outside, I was forced to do something radically different, to start looking within. This realization led me to the first, and perhaps most powerful shift in perspective. It was the first step off the treadmill. And it's what we're going to explore right now, the art of radical appreciation. And this is the art of radical appreciation. It isn't about forcing yourself to be grateful. It is quite simply the art of seeing. Instead of constantly looking toward the future, we gently shift our focus to the present. For example, on the same walk to work every day, instead of just rushing to get there, I started to notice the way the morning sun hit an old brick wall, or a tiny wildflower growing through a crack in the sidewalk. Those things were always there. I just had never truly seen them before. And the small lesson here is this: happiness isn't some grand destination. It's a hidden treasure found in the tiny details we so often overlook. However, This gentle way of seeing is very different from forcing ourselves to be happy. In fact, there's a common trap we can fall into when we first try this, and we're going to explore that right now. That trap I just mentioned has a very common name: toxic positivity. It's that invisible belief that we must be happy all the time, and that if we feel sad, angry, or disappointed, we're somehow failing. For instance, when I was going through a really tough time at work, so many people told me to just look on the bright side. But those words only made me feel more isolated, as if my sadness was wrong. The shift only came when a friend said something simple. "That sounds really hard. I'm here to listen." He didn't try to fix my sadness. He just gave it permission to exist. And the lesson here is this: true compassion for others and for ourselves isn't about chasing away to darkness, but about having the courage to sit with it. Allowing is always more powerful than resisting. So how do we practice this authentic appreciation without forcing it? There's a very simple and tangible exercise that can help ground us in the present moment, especially when we feel overwhelmed. This exercise is called the 5 Cents Gratitude Journal, and it's an incredibly powerful tool for pulling us out of an anxious stream of thought and back into reality. So right now, I invite you to try it with me. Wherever you are, just take a deep breath in and a slow breath out. First, let's begin with sight. Gently let your eyes rest on one object near you. Doesn't have to be anything special. Maybe it's the wood grain on your desk, or the way the light is coming through the window. Just see it and acknowledge it. Next hearing. Just listen. What's a sound you can hear right now? Maybe it's the hum of a fan, the faint sound of birds, or even the sound of silence itself. Now smell. Breathe in. Does the air have a scent? The smell of coffee, of an old book, or of coming rain. Then, touch. Feel the sensation of your clothes on your skin, the feeling of your feet on the floor, or the warmth from a cup of tea. And finally, taste. Recall a pleasant flavor you've recently experienced, the sweetness of a piece of fruit, or the savory taste of your last meal. The small lesson this exercise offers is this: the doorway to peace is always open. Our 5 senses are 5 pathways leading directly back to the present moment. Practicing this return to simplicity builds a solid foundation, an inner stability. And it's from that stable foundation that we gain the strength to face the things that are more difficult. This leads us directly to the second great pillar on our journey, the practice of wise acceptance. Welcome to the second pillar, the practice of wise acceptance. Many people confuse acceptance with resignation, with giving up, but they are entirely different. Resignation is giving away your power. It's saying, "There's nothing I can do." Wise acceptance, on the other hand, is a powerful act. It means seeing reality clearly without resistance so that you can act in the most effective way. It's like that sailor. He couldn't change the direction of the wind, but he could adjust his sails. When a project I poured my heart into failed, acceptance didn't mean I had to be happy that it failed. Acceptance was simply acknowledging the truth: this has happened. From that point of clarity, I could then ask, what can I learn from this? What is the next right step? And the small lesson here is this: we cannot control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond. Acceptance gives us back the power to focus on the one thing we can control: our own choice. However, this brave act of facing reality can sometimes be confused with a more subtle form of avoidance, a trap we'll explore right now. That subtle trap we just mentioned is called spiritual bypassing. It's the tendency to use spiritual ideas or practices to avoid dealing with uncomfortable feelings and unresolved psychological wounds. It's like building a beautiful spiritual roof on top of a weak and crumbling foundation. I used to think that acceptance meant I had to quickly forgive and forget. When an important relationship ended, I tried to skip over the pain by telling myself, it was a lesson. I just need to move on immediately. But really, I was just running away. True healing only began when I dared to admit I am in a lot of pain. I feel hurt and angry. And the lesson here is this. The spiritual path isn't about escaping our humanity. It's about embracing it more fully. To reach for the light, we must first be willing to go deep into our own shadows. True acceptance doesn't bypass emotion. It holds it with compassion. So if the answer isn't to run away, how do we actually face these difficult feelings safely without letting them overwhelm us? There is a simple science-based technique that can help us do just that. This technique is called Name It to Tame It, and it's an incredibly effective first aid tool for intense emotions. Neuroscience shows that when we use language to label a feeling, we activate our thinking brain, which helps to calm down our screaming, reactive brain. By simply giving an emotion a name, we begin to take back control. The next time a difficult emotion arises, maybe it's frustration in traffic or anxiety before a meeting. Try this. Pause, take a deep breath, and silently name it. Not to judge it, but just to acknowledge it. This is frustration. I am noticing the feeling of envy. A wave of sadness is here, and the core lesson here is this. You are not your anger. You are not your anxiety. You are the vast open sky that is aware of these feelings as they pass. When we learn to hold our own difficult emotions with compassion, something amazing happens. Our heart opens up. We develop a greater capacity, not just for our own struggles, but for the struggles of others. And this naturally leads us to the third and final pillar on our journey, the profound joy of selfless giving. And so we arrive at our third and final pillar, selfless giving. This isn't a moral duty, but one of the most direct paths to joy. Scientists call the warm, uplifting feeling you get after doing a good deed the helper's high. That's because acts of kindness release a cocktail of happy chemicals in our brain, like oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine. I remember a very small moment. I saw an elderly woman drop her grocery bag and everything spilled onto the street. I ran over to help her pick it all up. It only took a few minutes, but that feeling of warmth and connection stayed with me for the rest of the day. It gave me a more genuine joy than any personal accomplishment had. That act didn't take anything from me. On the contrary, it filled me up. And the lesson here holds a beautiful paradox. One of the most effective ways to make ourselves feel better is to help someone else feel better. Happiness isn't something you get, but something that radiates when you give. This wonderful feeling can be so rewarding that it's easy to want to do it all the time. But there's a delicate balance to be found. It's crucial that our giving comes from a place of abundance, not depletion. And this brings us to a very important warning. That important warning is this: beware of giving from an empty cup. When we constantly give our time, energy, and empathy without taking the time to replenish ourselves, we fall into a state called compassion fatigue. When that happens, the act of giving, which should bring joy, becomes a burden that leaves us feeling resentful and numb. For a long time, I took pride in being the person everyone could turn to. I listened, I gave advice. I always put their needs first. But then I realized that after comforting everyone else, I had no energy left for myself. My giving was no longer coming from a place of compassion, but from a sense of guilt and obligation. And the most important lesson I learned is in the flight safety instructions we've all heard. You must put on your own oxygen mask first before helping others. Self-care isn't selfish. It is the prerequisite for sustainable giving. Self-compassion is the fuel for world compassion. So how do we give in a way that fills us up instead of drains us? The secret lies in small, conscious acts rather than grand, depleting gestures. And there's a simple challenge we can all try. This challenge is called the Anonymous Kindness Challenge. Its goal is simple. Within the next 24 hours, do something kind for a stranger, without them knowing it was you, and without expecting anything in return, not even a thank you. The purpose is to separate the act of giving from our ego, the part of us that wants to be acknowledged and praised. It can be as simple as leaving a positive comment for a content creator you admire, or picking up a piece of trash in the park. These acts don't have to cost anything. They just have to come from a place of sincerity. And the lesson here is this: the purest joy of giving comes from the act itself, not the recognition. When we give anonymously, we cultivate a deep, quiet joy that is ours alone. So we've journeyed through our 3 pillars: appreciation, acceptance, and giving. But what holds all of these together? What is the foundation upon which all these practices are built? It is a quality that is increasingly rare in our noisy world: the practice of finding stillness. We've talked about these 3 beautiful practices: appreciation, acceptance, and giving. But you might be wondering, what's the glue that holds them all together? What creates the space for those seeds to actually grow? The answer, my friend, lies in one of the most precious and forgotten resources in our modern world: stillness. If those other 3 practices are the seeds, then stillness is the fertile soil. Without the soil, the seeds, no matter how powerful, can't take root and flourish. There's a beautiful example I always think of. Imagine our mind is like a jar of water filled with mud and sand. That mud and sand represents our thoughts, our worries, our to-do lists. As long as we keep shaking that jar by rushing, worrying, and filling every moment with noise, the water will always be cloudy. We can't see through it. We can't see what's really going on. But what happens if we just set the jar down and let it be still? Slowly, naturally, without any effort, the dirt settles to the bottom. The water becomes clear. Stillness does the same thing for our minds. It doesn't get rid of the mud. Life's challenges are still there, but it allows it to settle so we can see everything with clarity and peace. That's the small lesson here. Clarity doesn't come from getting rid of our problems, but from allowing our minds the grace of rest. So now we understand the why stillness is such a critical foundation. But what does it look like to practice this in real life? Perhaps instead of just talking about the clear water, we could take a few moments to experience it together. In this next section, I want to invite you to a short guided practice, a chance for us to set our own jars down and find that stillness right here and right now. Wonderful. I now invite you to find a comfortable seat. Allow your back to be upright in a natural way, and when you're ready, gently close your eyes. First, let's just bring our attention to the breath. Simply notice the feeling of the air as it enters and as it gently releases. Feel this natural rhythm, a steady anchor to the present moment. Now feel the weight of your body, the sensation of your feet on the floor, your hands resting in your lap. Allow yourself to be fully supported. Sooner or later, your mind will begin to wander. That is completely natural. Imagine your thoughts like clouds drifting across the sky. You are not the clouds, you are the sky. So when you notice you've been carried away by a thought, don't judge. Just gently acknowledge it, and then just as gently guide your attention back to the breath. Every time you do this, you are practicing kindness to yourself. Now slowly begin to bring your awareness back to the room, noticing the space around you. And whenever you're ready, gently open your eyes. Welcome back. Just take a moment to notice how you feel. Maybe a little calmer, a little clearer. This feeling of peace is always accessible inside of you, just a few conscious breaths away. This feeling is wonderful, isn't it? But the question is, how do we bring this peace into our busy everyday lives and build a practice that actually sticks? That's exactly what we're going to explore in our next section. After a moment of peace like that, our minds often jump to a huge goal. This is great. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to meditate for 30 minutes every day. But then, busy life happens, and we fail after a few days, feel guilty, and give up. Today, I want to suggest a different, much gentler approach. It's the 1% better method. Instead of trying to climb the whole mountain in one day, what if our only goal was to simply lay one single stone perfectly? Here's a real-world example instead of the goal. Meditate for 30 minutes. Try a goal that's too small to fail. Before I take my first sip of coffee in the morning, I will take 3 slow, deep breaths. That's it. And here is the most important lesson. Consistency is more powerful than intensity. It is far better to practice for 1 minute every day than for 30 minutes once a week. The victory isn't having a perfect meditation session. The victory is in the act of showing up. So start small. Pick one thing. Maybe it's 3 breaths. Maybe it's 1 minute of gratitude before bed. Build your path 1 stone at a time. The goal isn't perfection, it's connection. Because when you practice consistently, no matter how small, you're not just building a habit. You are gently nurturing the light that is already inside of you. And in our final section, we'll talk about what it means to let that light shine. When we began this journey, we spoke of that feeling of emptiness, of searching for happiness on the outside. I used to think happiness was a destination to arrive at a mountain to conquer. But through everything we've shared, I've realized a different truth. Each of us is like a lantern. Life with its worries and its busyness can smudge the glass of that lantern, making the flame inside seem dim. Our entire journey from appreciating, to accepting, to giving, to finding stillness and practicing daily was never about finding a new flame. It was about gently cleaning the glass. And this is the most real-world example. Happiness isn't a day with no traffic jams. It's remembering to take a deep breath while you're stuck in one. Happiness isn't the absence of sadness. It's knowing how to sit with your sadness like a friend when it visits. So the final lesson I want to leave with you is this. This journey isn't about becoming a perfect, enlightened person. It's about remembering the wonderful, radiant person you already are. Your light was never extinguished. It was just waiting for your attention. Thank you for walking this path with me today. This journey is more beautiful when we walk it together. I would love to hear your story. What is the first stone you plan to lay on your own path? Please share it in the comments below.